Oh man, if I got one for you today. This is the amazing bar hiding, drink dispensing, shelf floating, stash hiding secret bar I call Murphy's Secret. This is not your mom's drop down ironing board. This is a bar that is sure to blow the minds of your friends, and you can be sure it'll be more than the shelf that'll be dropping after an evening with this bar. I dug through my array of plywood offcuts and found exactly what I needed. A 4x4 sheet of half-inch maple plywood, birch on one side, maple on the other. After a quick sanding to remove all the scuffs from sitting around for years, I began to lay out the initial cuts. The first cut was made with a circular saw to make the piece easier to handle on the table saw. I switched the blade on the table saw over to a finishing blade and started cutting. Some pieces I wanted to be grain matched, so I laid them out together. I even took care to include the 3/32 of an inch width of the cutting blade. I used my jigsaw to make the initial cut before finishing this off on the table saw. To get really close to the line without too much overcut, I raised the saw blade to its max and snuck right up to that line. This certainly is not the safest way to use a table saw and should be avoided for the majority of the cuts. This is a rigid job site table saw. Like you, I'm sure, I get discouraged about building things when I see people on YouTube turn on their $3,000 saw. I'm here to show you that you should be able to make high quality cuts with just about any table saw. I bundled these pieces together and put them aside. I drew out the cut lines for the shelf on a single piece, again for grain matching. The saw blade was set to 45 and the shelf edges are mitered nicely to hide the plywood core. I took time and care to make sure that these edges met perfectly, reducing the amount of material removed with each cut. A small notch needs to be taken out of the back of the top of the shelf to accommodate the shelf support and the stay level mechanism. You can see how raising the blade to its max really reduced overcut. Here I'm cutting out the outer frame of the bar. You can see the mitered edges take away the need for edge banding and give a really nice finished look. Next, I cut out the main body and the shelves for the bar. I decided to cut dados to support the shelves. I just did this by making multiple passes of my table saw. I don't have a dado blade. This trick has always worked for me. The bar body was just butt jointed using glue and these angle clamps I quickly made up from 5/8 inch plywood before brad nailing the joints. I decided to glue up the outer frame using CA glue just to make the assembly a little easier. This is the first project that I've used blue tape to hold pieces together, and even as clamps, it will for sure not be the last. The blue tape came in very handy when lining up the edges during the glue up of the shelf. I used maple strips for veneer on the front edges of the bar. Again, blue tape to hold it in place while the glue dried. I assembled the box edges so I knew where to cut the veneer. I marked the veneer strip and then cut it on the table saw before gluing it all in place. After the glue dried, I removed the tape and lightly sanded the edges. The plywood veneer is very thin, so don't get carried away while sanding. To trim the edge banding from the box body, I used a flush cut router bit. The plywood is only 1/2 inch wide, so I clamped these offcuts flush with the edge for a more stable base to run the router along. The veneer strips look awesome, but I don't think they were needed everywhere. The front of the bar needed veneer, but I just used iron-on edge banding. This stuff is quick and easy to use. Simply iron it on, then use a trim tool or razor blade like I did here to trim off the excess. After a quick sanding, it looks great. If you're worried about messing up the face of your plywood with your router bit, you can use tape to protect it. I did this once but realized it wasn't necessary, so I stopped. To make the arms for the stay level mechanism, I cut out pieces of plywood and using the head of this key, traced a curve. I cut it out using my jigsaw and cleaned up the edges with sandpaper before applying edge banding. This was not easy, but it turned out okay, but just okay. I decided to abandon the plywood and use this 1/8 inch strip of birch I had laying around instead. I marked and drilled a 3/4 inch hole in the lower shelf before applying polyurethane to all pieces. Finishing is my least favorite part of building stuff, but I do love seeing the grain pop when the finish is applied. It's the waiting that kills me. After all the sides were finished and dry, I assembled the bar. The upper shelf was glued and nailed into the dado. I flipped the body over, squared it up, and began gluing and nailing the back into place. I use my air nailer because I have one, but you could just as easily use a small brad nails and a hammer. Because I'm relying on glue to hold the outer sides of the body, I sanded off the finish from the glue contacted areas to allow the glue to soak into the fibers. I applied clamps to provide pressure while the glue dried. For the bottom and top of the outer box pieces, I also applied glue to the mitered edges. It was very satisfying to see these edges come together. Then I used my pin nailer to nail everything in place. This is nice because I didn't need to use wood filler afterwards. For the hinges, I don't have a centering drill bit, so I came up with this method. First, I used a bit that is the same size as the hole in the hinge, then followed it up with a pilot bit. I laid out the location of the hinges and screwed them into place. This 2-bit method took a tiny bit longer than using a centering bit, but it worked awesome. The head of the larger bit made just enough of an indent in the very center of the hole that the pilot bit bottomed into. I've installed a few hinges, and I have to say I rarely get it right the first time. Actually, you know what? I never get it right the first time. This time, I did. I placed small pieces of plywood at the bottom of the bar to act as supports for the false bottom. Next, I installed the front of the bar, pin nailed it into place, and later face screwed the bottom to the body of the bar. This face strip is the piece that the shelf support is attached to. I made it out of solid maple, but the plans show that it's made from plywood. That's your choice. Next, I laid out the holes for the mechanism screws. Using my drill press, I drilled a pilot hole, then transferred this hole to the face strip. Measured out the location of the bottom holes and drilled the pilot hole out here as well. Here you can see I'm using a block of wood to guide the drill bit. This can be used in place of a drill press as well. This fastener is called a Chicago screw, and if I can find it at my local Home Hard to Find there, you'll have no trouble locating them. You could use regular wood screws too, but I like the finished look that these provide. Back at the drill press, I countersunk the hole for the head of the Chicago screw before boring the hole for the shaft of the screw to fit. After all the holes were drilled, I assembled the mechanism. Next, the shelf was put into place. I secured the shelf to the supports using small angle brackets and 1/2-inch screws. This was a little tricky, but I got it eventually. I leveled out the bar top before attaching this brass chain. I attached the chain through the bar top and into the face strip to help hold the face strip into place along with the previously applied glue. Here I'm drilling holes to insert magnets to hold the bar top closed. I used tape to locate the middle of the magnet and another piece to locate the proper location of the magnet that was inserted into the side of the bar top. This actually worked great. I used just a dab of wood glue to keep the magnet in the hole. I initially intended this bar to recess between 2 studs and a 2x4 wall, but ended up by just mounting it to the wall in the end. This project kept me up at night because I was so excited to build it. I designed and built this thing in a week, which for me is very fast. It's a lot of fun to show off and see people's reactions while they try to figure out how it works. The secret compartment is a nice feature. Any ideas what I could put in there? Let me know in the comments. As always, there are detailed plans that along with this video will help you build one of these yourself. Really all you need is a 4x4 sheet of plywood and some common hardware. I updated my website a few months back and I love how it worked out. I get these little chimes whenever a set of plans is purchased. Let me tell you, hearing that chime really motivates me to keep sharing my ideas. So thank you to everyone who has purchased plans and will purchase plans. It means more to me than you know. I'm already working on another idea. Remember the Chable? Well, it's along those lines, of course with a few twists. If you want to see how that comes out, be sure to subscribe. I'm also toying with the idea of offering a subscription service to my plans, something like a one-time payment that will give you access to all the plans on my website and the plans going forward. Let me know in the comments if that's something that anybody would be interested in.